On the topic of like what you just said, which was one thing we were talking about before you came in here, like when you're talking about like some of it does feel a little too, you know, like out. I don't know if out of reach for normal. It's just like here's an example. Like I know a lot of people. There's a lot of money in crypto, and they're like, hey, we want to have like all of these, you know, make movies in that space, and we want like, and I've been approached a lot of times, right? But and there's all these people that have all these versions of things that exist, like in entertainment, right? But like none of them actually, in reality, anyone kind of uses them to any like real extent. So it's like
they're all theoretical.
Well, yeah, it like really, all these people, they're like, we have money and we want to do things, and I think from my perspective, it's like. It's not that I'm just not after, I'm not after like a cash grab that no one's going to see. So it's like, there's no, like what will be the first one where you're like, yo, everyone's actually like watching this thing in there. Do you think, and then, that's like the first part of it.
Sure. So, well, first is, I don't know, do you remember the dotcom bubble?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, basically, I mean, there's a huge surge of energy going into internet companies. Many of them crashed and ended up with nothing. The things that really did keep growing, though, the main thing was just internet connectivity. People were just getting online, right? That itself was like a thing, you know? And then over time, a few years after the dot-com bubble, really 2004, right, was when Google's IPO was. And then people were like, wait a second, you can make money on the internet? For 4 years, no one had believed you could make money on the internet because of the dot-com crash, and everyone's focused on 9/11 and Iraq and all this stuff. And Google showed you could make money on the internet. And then, but Google was like the only one that was doing so for a long time.
You said even how like MySpace like never really figured out how to make money.
Yeah, exactly. So Facebook and Twitter got started in the mid 2000s, and they were looked at as total frou-frou, stupid things where, you know, they're also never going to make money. People use them, but for, you know, they're not going to make money. And it was really only 2008, 2009, after the iPhone and the financial crisis and so on, that the modern internet really took off. That is when Google and Facebook really went vertical in terms of ads.
Why do you think that is?
Several reasons. One is that
iPhone?
Well, the iPhone was huge, right? That was huge.
But was there like something about like all of like crashing out all the bad stuff to start again or something?
Yeah, it's something where like there's just a lot of stuff that got built over the 2000s, like open source became better. A lot of stuff that's invisible to the public, right?
Okay.
Like a lot of back-end infrastructure where something that might have taken 1,000 lines of code to do was one line, right? A lot of that type of stuff is invisible. It's back-end stuff, you know? So open source stacks got good. Social and search had proved themselves out. AWS had finally worked. A lot of companies tried to do what has become Amazon Web Services, like data center in the cloud, before Amazon executed on it. You know, Apple obviously did the iPhone. And mainstream media, basically, everybody who had been running ads in 2008 in mainstream media suddenly had a cash crunch and needed to look for more efficient channels. So necessity brought them to the internet. And even
that's like a big part of it now, right?
That's right. So even in 2008, 2009, like, you know, Joel Stein, other folks have written like in that era lists of like the power centers of the U.S. Silicon Valley was not on those lists.
And how many people were on the list? It was like 10.
It was like you know, the Pentagon, Hollywood, New York, Madison Avenue. It was like, you know, kind of what the older institutions of the U.S. were.
They always miss it.
Well, so here's the thing: this whole internet tech thing is basically like about 10 years old. It's very, very, it's very young, right? If you think, right? And, you know, Uber, Airbnb.
And it's already like moving on to the next thing, apparently.
It's moving on to the next thing. So Uber, Airbnb, Stripe, they're all basically like 08, 09, you know, 2010 founded, right? This whole internet era is very, very recent. People's memories have started being rewritten. But if you go back and look, it was not like that before the iPhone. The internet, I mean, it was just thought of as gadgets.
I guess I do.
Like gadgets. Well, it's like the BlackBerry, which even now, like at the time, was the most amazing device because that's, you know, the gold standard. And then the iPhone came out, and all of a sudden you're like, this thing is a piece of shit.
I stuck it out for a while.
I know. Ryan was like, I remember that. You're like, I love the keyboard.
That's right. So now
the last man
keyboard warrior,
Tim Allen.
So now let's take that and apply it to crypto, right? So, you know, the internet represented a fundamental improvement on just how we deal with information, right? Things we totally take for granted. You can copy paste. Okay, I mean, that's computers, but just general. You can copy paste. You can send instantly to people, you know, via an email. You can search index. You can, you know, everything you can think of that you could do with information, you could do with a few keystrokes. Just to put that in perspective, again, within human memory, Xerox was invented like in the 1900s. I mean, not 1900s, but like I think it's like 1950s or 60s. I don't remember exactly when. The photocopier was like invented within living memory. Okay.
Yeah.
You couldn't just change the font on a document with one tap. You had to go and like reprint out the whole thing. Okay. So you couldn't change fonts. You couldn't copy paste. You couldn't search. You couldn't change color tones. Like all of these things.
Stuff that's just nothing now.
Stuff that's just nothing now was a massive effort back then. Okay. And like we don't really think about that too much because we're sort of, something is awesome and then within a few months it's taken for granted. It's part of your workflow if it works, right? So, but the improvements, you're talking about orders and orders of magnitude on like the speed of transmitting information. I mean, like 9 orders of magnitude in some cases. Just to give you one example, okay? As you
Upload speeds.
Go ahead.
Upload speeds.
Yeah, sure. So exactly, right? So, but give you one example. Let's say if you go from sending a physical mail to sending an email to sending a group email to a Facebook thread, okay? Each of those is incremental, but the combination is ridiculous. Okay, so sending a physical mail to sending an email, well, you send it express, FedEx or something, the highest price thing, and it arrives in maybe like 24 hours, okay? But you send an email and it arrives in seconds or minutes. The thing is, at that time, you had to spend a huge amount of money up front, and the other guy had to spend money. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's faster, but I have to spend $5,000 for a computer system, an internet system, and this guy does too. Am I really going to send that many emails to this person as a one-off? Seems kind of stupid. So corporations did it for intranets first. Then corporations were sending between, or not just corporations, academia was doing it, and then corporations were doing it. And out of that, eventually, it started to come to the home user in the 90s. So there's physical mail to email, then you go email to group email. Now you can send a reply all thread, okay? Now you go from reply all to a Facebook thread where people can reply and post messages, thumbs up, whatever.
Bug you all day.
Yeah, okay, right. So now you take this, and I haven't posted on Facebook in a long time, or Twitter, whatever. Take a Facebook thread, you compare how expensive that would be to do with physical mail. Okay, let's say you've got 300 people in your Facebook thread, right?
Yeah.
Okay, imagine taking 300 picture postcards, sending stamps to 300 people. 2 of them come back, one set, and each one of them, when they want to make a comment, okay, they come back to you with lol,
unfollowed,
or something like that, right? They mail it back, and then you have to rebroadcast that out to the other 300 people, and just keep doing this. All right, like what is
the Polaroid?
I mean, to think about something like even this right now, like the people are watching this on YouTube, and then there's that comment section below.
Yeah.
On top of essentially like a network TV
they have
station.
to come to your house and yell at you.
That's right. That's right. So and like just within living memory, I mean, the Unabomber, right?
Yeah.
The Unabomber. Do you know why
Big fan, yeah.
Okay. You know why he killed all those people?
Yeah. That it was something with. I watched it. It was the government.
He killed all those people to get an op-ed in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
I did not
So
know that. I'm
he-
thinking of a different bomber.
Yeah, okay, different. So the Unabomber killed for the distribution.
But didn't the Unabomber have the big manifesto?
Yeah, that's the same guy.
Oh,
So-
okay.
That
Because
manifesto.
he wanted to post this big manifesto. Okay.
Yeah, so in the early 90s, distribution of your concepts, your words, etc., was so scarce that he had to kill multiple people, so he thought, to get the distribution.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, you could just have a podcast.
I mean,
someone as crazy as that could have a podcast.
We know
right?
a lot of people with a manifesto probably that are posting it online
Yeah.
every day, and they're still thinking like,
So-
do I have to kill a guy?
Well, right. So the thing is, of
become
course,
too easy.
Of course, it's both bad and good, right? Essentially, there's a lot of people who won't kill somebody, but they certainly will troll somebody, and that's a lot of people on Twitter. There might be 1,000x as many people who will do something insane and stupid and mean and angry for distribution on Twitter versus those who actually go and kill somebody. So that's obviously the bad part. The good part is that distribution has opened up in a dramatic way, and now everybody can have a podcast, a TV show, et cetera, right? What's my point? Putting it together.
Yeah, how does it look like in the future on the decentralized world?
So once we have seen just like the degree of the exponential on the internet and computers within our lifetime, it's like, as I said, this thing is 10 years old. And even during the 2000s, the internet was basically mostly dismissed. Like, people were on the internet, but it was not the center of all government and so on and so forth. Like, politicians who, they thought of the internet as kind of this swampy thing that's sort of below them, and, they were
The
on
dark web.
No, it wasn't even the dark web.
But that's how they viewed it almost. Like
No,
it's like,
it wasn't yet coded as malign because even in 2008 and 2012,
This is like clunky and like.
it's like a hobbyist.
Facebook helped Obama get elected, if you remember, in 2008, 2012. And Facebook was really good, considered good by the press in 2008 and 2012 because it did so, right? So the internet was either harmless or cute, whatever. It wasn't like the real affairs of state.
And then it got the wrong guy elected. And
Well, okay, right. So now, but actually, even before then, even in 2013 is when the attitude shifted, because by 2013 you can no longer deny that the internet was crushing old media revenues. It dropped from like 67 billion to like 17 billion in 5 years. There's this graph by Mark Perry, print media disruption. So Google and Facebook took all this revenue. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, just all went vertical, right? And that caused
Yeah, they weren't happy about it.
them to be unhappy. And so these guys who, in the mainstream press, I call them now, I don't call them the mainstream media, I call them downstream media. You know why? Because they're downstream of the internet, they're downstream of you guys, right?
Yeah.
And they're literally just reposting tweets and, so
lists
on.
It's like, it's like not your grandmother's media. It's like literally your grandmother's media.
My dad doesn't even get the paper anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So the downstream media, basically, at that time, they couldn't...
Downstream media, love it.
It's good, right? So they couldn't they couldn't build search engines or social networks, but they could write stories and shape narratives. And the difference between a story and a product release?
Like one's by the person that did it.
Well, this is kind of a one-liner, but the story has a bad guy.
Okay. Yeah.
And so who's the bad guy? It was tech guys. How about that? The guys who just bankrupted and disrupted all of these media companies, suddenly they were cast as the villain. And so from 2013 to 2019, 2020, all of these journos were just looking for...
Journos is funny because it sounds like pedos. Like it just sounds bad.
Yeah. So the journos, right, basically were going after all these people in tech, whether they were an engineer who just made some off-color comment on Twitter.
It was.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mentioned this today, it's like more accountability for somebody's old tweets than all the wars in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So just like hunting these guys, right, for clicks. And that carried on for basically about 7 years. And what it led to, among other things, was the wokeifying of Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. That's actually MAGA versus MAGA. That's the other MAGA.
Oh, the MAGA.
Right? Yeah. And Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, right? Is that good, right? So MAGA versus MAGA is what we're shaping up, right? So
with like no accountability too, because it really is. That's one of the things is once things get big enough, that people can be wrong as many times as they want, and doesn't matter. Where it's in any sort of newer thing, you're actually graded on your accomplishments or whatever. But I guess
I
they're
thought
just solving for the wrong. They're solving for one thing without caring about all the other things.
I thought about this a lot actually, and I was like, how is it that these journalists could be so wrong about everything? They're wrong about Bitcoin, they're wrong about Iraq. There's this book, actually, everybody who's watched this podcast should read this, by Ashley Rinsberg. It's called The Gray Lady Winked, and it just goes through the New York Times history, and you're like, wow, they, now they're all staying with Ukraine. You know what they were doing in 1932, 1933? Choke out Ukraine.
Really?
Well,
Yeah.
I think it
The
almost might
Holodomor,
be secondary,
the Ukrainian famine. Yeah,
because it's well, tell me if you agree with this, but it's almost like we're saying that the journalists are wrong about everything, but it's almost like the politicians and those people are kind of wrong about everything, and they're their press secretaries.
It's both and.
Yeah,
exactly.
Maybe they work together.
Yeah, so it's like it is something where at different times in U.S. history you can argue that one was prime and the other wasn't, right? Nowadays, I think the term the U.S. establishment is better, I think, than the term the U.S. government, because first, people can't deny that a U.S. establishment exists. You might deny that a deep state exists. You cannot deny an establishment exists. An establishment does exist. Second, the term establishment is inclusive of but not coterminous with government, right? The government is part of the establishment, but there are establishment grandees who are not actually government employees.
Ooh, grandees, that's great.
Yeah, right? And so these...
You're an establishment grande.
Establishment grande, right?
Yeah.
So you have, the dean of Harvard is definitely part of the establishment. Arthur Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times, absolutely part of the establishment, albeit not the U.S. government, right?
Yeah.
So these are... One way of thinking about it is the control circuitry for the formal government lies outside of the formal government and is itself resistant to the democracy it claims to support. For example, Sulzberger has dual class stock, so he can't be actually, there's no hostile takers are very difficult, right? Or you have a tax exempt foundation like Harvard, right? Or you have something where it's a regulator and they've got career tenure. Or you've got a professor and they've got tenure, right? Yeah. So these guys can't be, they're not electable to the electorate or the market. they've got these, protected positions in different ways, whether it's tenure or it's tax exemption or it is dual class or something like
So
that.
they're actually successful if you just understand what they're optimizing for.
They are, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're optimizing for power, not for being correct.
And if you own the New York Times, right, like you have the power to kind of just dispatch the people who don't agree with you.
Well, so just on this topic, right? Like, Mark Zuckerberg, you may agree or disagree. I don't agree with every decision he's made, but I do admire him because he's the son of a dentist, right? There's a lot of people who went to Harvard. He's way more successful than basically a lot of folks combined. And he built the whole thing, So Zuckerberg built his fortune, okay? And people all recognize his face, okay? If I say Arthur G. Sulzberger, do you recognize his face?
No.
How interesting is Yeah, or his name.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Sulzberger inherited the New York Times Company. And it is a company. It is a publicly traded company. It has dual class stock. And when you look at it in the New York Times, if you go and Google, for example, how Punch protected the Times, you'll see Joe Nocera in 2012 talk about how great it is that the New York Times has dual class stock. If you then Google how you can't fire Mark Zuckerberg's kids, you'll see a different New York Times writer talk about how horrible it is that Mark Zuckerberg has dual class stock.
Right.
Yeah.
So dual class stock is good when they have it and bad when they don't have it. This is when I remember the thing I was saying where it's like basically whatever is good is that supports the social network and whatever is bad is that which is against it, right? So dual class itself is essentially what it is it's an old tactic. It's a universalist argument for particularist ends. This is the same that the Russians did during, the Soviet Union. The universalist argument was communism. The particularist end was the expansion of the Russian Empire.
Yes.
Right? And so this, you can generalize it as talk left, act right. Okay? Let's say you're evil Elon Musk. Okay? Evil Elon Musk, all right? What would he want to do? He would want to...
Tweet?
Well, okay, sure. But evil Elon Musk would want to export strikes to General Motors and Ford,
Okay.
and so right. All of them would be riven by internal dissension at each other's throats. They're not shipping anything. Blah blah. All this labor unrest, right? While his company practices a Nietzschean variety of aligned capitalism. Okay, and if you look at someone like Sulzberger, right? His newspaper talks endlessly about white privilege. This is like the ultimate privileged white. He's got this giant mansion, which somehow is not in the paper. His face isn't in the paper. Okay. And, this thing about, people are bad for going to, taking their kids out of public school. These guys all go to private school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't even know what a public school is.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is that it is, it's something where you really need to play the man, not the ball.
Yes.
And because what they're saying, they'll talk left, they'll export left, but they will practice the most ruthless capitalist kind of thing, out of a caricature that you'd ever find, right? And this is something where now people in tech in particular are seeing this because people in tech are basically self-made, right? Zuckerberg built his fortune, Sulzberger inherited his. The thing about these old media grandees, right? They're basically, I call them the meritless nepotists, right? Because they have no merit. They literally inherited their fortunes, their newspapers, etc. It's not that they get great coverage, they get no coverage.
Plus, they're in charge of the coverage.
They're in charge of coverage.
And I'm sure if some other paper magnate want to start some war, it benefits nobody. So then they both keep each other's names out of their
But
mouth.
Zuck, for all his
just keep each other's names.
Zuck, for all his faults, and all the tech people, for all their faults, have given everybody a voice, right? That is what the establishment hates so much, right? It is not that, this is a threat to democracy. What they hate is what we would call democracy, the voice that people have now. All these people around the world have a voice. They hate that. They're not against filter bubbles. They're against the plural filter bubble. They want only one filter bubble, which is old media or whatever, right? The halcyon age of, 2007, if the MAGA guys want to wind back the clock to 1950, these guys want to wind back the clock to 2007 or something like that when they were still dominant and tech was just making gadgets, right?